My opponent claims he is only advocating for a closed border policy, but simultaneously is claiming that the radicalised and dangerous refugees aren't going to be a problem in the countries that they're in at the moment. If he isn't going to send them back to Syria, what is he proposing? Because it seems like he's proposing that the effective use of current security policies are enough to protect people. If so, that seems to support my case instead of his. I'll summarise the debate on three topics: politics, home security, and military intervention. My first argument is about politicians and them as source material. So my opponent says that I dropped the Chris Christie argument. Here's why. Because the husband involved with the shooting was born in Illinois, and the wife was born in Pakistan, then moved to Saudi Arabia. This has nothing to do with Syrian refugees, as Chris Christie wants to claim. And coming back to the point on Ted Cruz, here's the site that I've been using to list the untruths that he's claimed about refugees and the correcting facts for those statements. But politicians in general are just a bad source of information, particularly on politically diverse issues, because they each have their own political agenda that to too many of them is seen as more important than the truth, as shown by Chris Christie and Ted Cruz. This also extends to foreign policy, so no foreign minister is ever going to say that a meeting with another country went terribly. They have to defend their government's policies, even in face of likely defeat, because the government must be seen to be confidently in control of each situation. Just because they claim to be playing happy families doesn't make it so, and I'll come back to this in my final point. My second argument is home security. So the idea of background checks, first of all. The status quo for Europe is that no background checks exist, so let's look at places where background checks are in place. The US, since September 11, 2001, the US has taken 750,000 refugees. None of them have been arrested in domestic terrorism charges, though 2 were charged with terrorist activities connected to aiding Al-Qaeda. 2 out of 750,000, that seems like effective background checking to me. The problem currently in the EU is that many countries have too many refugees and they do not have the resources to effectively screen them all. The only way to do that is to spread the burden proportionally between each country. Currently, borders are closing because countries are scared of being inundated with refugees. I say this as a member of the EU. Those fears are calmed by the number of refugees being manageable. They are then cared for by each country's own refugee process. Yes, it's difficult. That doesn't mean it should not be mandated if it shows the best chance of success as a policy. From a European perspective, it is not good enough to simply say that we will close the borders, because the refugees will continue to make the journey illegally by, for example, by crossing the sea in overcrowded boats to the Greek islands. That didn't work out very well the last time. Forcing them to live illegally or be sent back to a war-torn Syria by border police is a far worse option than organising people so security checks can be carried out properly. Finally, on military intervention. Yes, we both agree that this is necessary, but disagree on why this point is related to debate on refugees, and disagree on the complexity of the response needed in Syria. My opponent says we should not accept refugees because they should stay in Syria so we can arm them and then they can take on ISIS. First of all, there's no moral justification to support this policy, and I explained in round 1 why this is not morally acceptable. Second of all, we have the practicalities of this argument. Are you going to support them if they are the Kurdish forces or the Free Syrian Army, or will you support an oppressive Assad regime? Just saying that we will close our borders and send them guns and hope for the best is really not a plan. My policy actually allows the option of greater on-the-ground military intervention that works. Currently, it is very difficult for David Cameron to actually commit troops to the Syrian war because of the political fallout of the Iraq War and the crucifixion that Tony Blair received. It is much easier to convince the House of Commons and the public that sending troops will be a positive thing when he can claim the moral argument of protecting civilians as I laid out in round 1. Sending troops allows us to coordinate the fractured rebels that already exist and provide military tactics training. This is more useful than more guns being used by untrained hands. The second issue with Iraq was leaving a power vacuum. We then have the capability to deal with the Assad regime and negotiate the political fallout of that because our troops are already in Syria. Again, this is palatable because we can claim the argument of rebuilding a politically stable Syria for the refugees to return to. Again, less guilt from civilian casualties means that the public is less likely to force an early end to the UK's involvement. The same analysis is applicable to other European military players. America playing happy families with Russia is not enough to secure long-term stability in Syria. It will just help consolidate the power of the Assad regime, and the reasons that the Syrian war happened in the first place will not be solved. My policy is the most practical response to a complex European and Syrian issue and must be proposed.